I tried to enlist Shadow, but that dude is throwing some serious shade. Griffin Turner to the ninja. Hello, I'm Sensei the Dark Master, and in today's installment of The Lore of Ninjago, we shall be continuing the coverage of the many elemental powers of Ninjago, with today's video discussing the dark element of Shadow. We shall be covering this element's history, those people, creatures, and objects that have wielded this power, the power it grants upon a user, its weaknesses, the colors and symbols associated with it, and much, much more. The history of the elemental power of Shadow begins like that of most other elements, with the first Spinjitzu master, who would then teach the power to an individual who would become known as the first elemental master of Shadow. This individual would pass the power to his or her child, who would then pass it to their child for over 100 generations. Eventually, the elemental power of Shadow passed to a woman who participated in the First Serpentine War against the Anakandrai warriors, who had been stoked into fighting thanks to Master Chen. She, alongside Wu Garmadon and the other elemental masters, battled the mighty Anakandrai, and though at first they lost and partially undermined thanks to the conniving of Master Chen, it was figured out that a certain set of magical flutes could stop the Serpentine, and saw the former Master of Shadow defeat and imprison the 5 tribes of the Serpentine and punishing Chen by banishing him to an island. We then saw the former elemental master of Shadow fight against the evil Time Twins, who attempted to conquer over Ninjago thanks to their elemental powers of time and their ego. Despite their abilities, they were defeated and left through a time portal, escaping. Eventually, this former elemental master of Shadow would pass the ability to their child, who would become known as Shade, who is the current elemental master of Shadow. At some point before the start of the series, Shade unlocked his true potential, i.e. the ability to use the elemental power of Shadow. He would then be seen at Ninjago City docks, where he was invited into the Tournament of Elements held by Master Chen. He was taken by ferry with Klaus to the island to participate in this tournament, and he also met the ninja and other elemental masters during this time. Shade used the elemental power of Shadow to get a Jade Blade, and thus was able to survive the first round of the tournament relatively easily. The next day, he, alongside the other elemental masters, watched several rounds of fighting between elemental masters. These included a fight between Gravis, the elemental master of gravity, versus Griffin Turner, the elemental master of speed, which is an element that was the subject of the previous Ninjago lore video, so check that out if you're more interested in that subject. There was also a fight between Ash, the elemental master of smoke, and Kai, the ninja of fire, and between Bolobo, master of nature, versus Neuro, the elemental master of mind. All elements that have gotten their own videos covering them. I suggest that you check them out. And Shade would, in the next night, participate in the third round of the tournament that saw him participate in a sort of roller derby where he could either help or harm Lloyd or Tox in their battle between each other. While the other elemental masters were able to form somewhat of an alliance, Shade would, due to his mysterious and cryptic nature, was in strife, and the other elemental masters considered him to be a spy, which was ironic since the real spy was not him. In the final round of the tournament, he and the other elemental masters, alongside the ninja, were dropped onto the island, and eventually, despite his abilities, was captured by the Anakandrai cultists, thanks to there being a tracking device embedded in his bow and arrow. And he was stripped of his elemental power by Chen, who proceeded to start the plot to transform his warriors into invincible Anakandrai warriors. However, with some quick thinking, the ninja destroyed the Staff of Elements, which allowed the elemental essences to return to their former masters. Shade would then use the elemental power of shadow to help capture most of the cult, but Chen escaped and in his most evil act used his own daughter to complete the spell and turned the entire cult into invincible anaconda warriors, which overwhelmed Shade and the other elemental masters and left them trapped on the island. However, Zane then arrived and helped Shade overcome his greatest fear and summon the elemental shadow dragon, which allowed for him to escape the island alongside the other elemental masters. Shade would then use the elemental power of shadow during the battle for the Corridor of Elders during the Second Serpentine War, when he had to hold the line long enough until Garmadon made the ultimate sacrifice and banished Chen and his cult into the Cursed Realm and stopped the evil plot. Following this, Shade promised to help the ninja in the case of future threats to Ninjago. Sadly, he didn't really do a good job, as during the events of Skybound, Nauticon off-screen tricked Shade and most of the other elemental masters into getting trapped inside the Jin Blade, though Jay would eventually undo the events of the season due to his last wish. The elemental power of Shadow and Shade himself would be mentioned during the events of Ninjago Decoded, which was a short miniseries where Zane was put into a coma for a time, and the ninja had to use his memories to wake him up again. Basically just a glorified clip show. Shade and the elemental power of Shadow, however, would make a true return during the events of Hunted, where he used them to help Lloyd in his little resistance movement against his resurrected father, the evil Emperor Garmadon and his biker cult, the Sons of Garmadon. He did a good job, but ended up getting captured and sent into the Cryptarian prison, though when the ninja returned, he and the others escaped and staged a coup against the evil cult and helped to defeat him, and he celebrated their victory alongside them. Now that we've covered the history of the element, let us discuss those people who have wielded its power. First, of course, there was the first Benjitsu master. Then there was the first elemental master of shadow. Then there was the previous elemental master of shadow, who was probably the mother of Shade, and latest in this direct lineage is Shade, who is the current elemental master of shadow. Via the Staff of Elements, both Master Chen and Kai temporarily wielded the power. And via the elemental power of Amber, which got its own video and allows the user to use other elemental powers, Skylar also wielded the power of Shadow. Nauticon could also technically use this power, but chose not to during the events of Skybound. In terms of creatures, only one has wielded the element of shadow, that being the elemental shadow dragon, which is noteworthy for its shadowy, ashy type body, though admittedly it is one of the more generic elemental dragons that we've seen. In terms of objects, there have been two. First, there was the Staff of Elements, which was constructed from two substances, chronosteel and blue crystal, which on their own each could absorb a single element, but when combined together they could absorb multiple ones. The second object was the Jin Blade, which could tap into the elemental power of shadow or any other element, assuming that it absorbed the soul of an elemental master of shadow or equivalent such. Now that we've covered those objects, creatures, and people that have wielded the power, let us discuss the powers that it bestows upon a user itself. In terms of abilities, there are several. First is Umbra Kinetic Invisibility, with which the user is able to become one with and undetectable as long as they are in shadows or darkness, and they can even turn invisible. With Umbra Portation, the user can teleport to a place where another one has a shadow present, i.e., basically just going through shadows. With a dragon creation, a user can manifest an elemental shadow dragon, which allows them to fly with relative speed through the air. The elemental power of shadow is generally associated with the color black or very dark gray, and the symbol of shadow is the vague face of a wolf, Rather interesting, though it kind of looks more like a Shima icon. In terms of weaknesses, the element, due to its nature, is more effective in placing with shadows and darkness, as bright light weakens it and negates some of its abilities. Plus, the dragon disappears when one is overwhelmed with sheer fear. From the element of shadow, we learn that it is wrong to judge a book by its cover. And just because something or someone looks shadowy, that doesn't mean that they're inherently evil. And in fact, they could actually be good guys, and the real evil could be hidden somewhere else. We must remember this and apply it in our lives. I am Sensei the Dark Master, and join me next time on The Lore of Ninjago, where if you like this video, please subscribe and just have a nice day.